we'll learn more about tax increment financing, also referred to as TIFs, and discuss TIF-related ordinances that will be on the Columbus City Council agenda for final consideration on Monday, November 23rd, 2020. I'm Councilmember Emmanuel Remy, Chair of the Economic Development Committee. I'd like to recognize and thank my colleagues for being here this evening. Councilmember Dorans, Council Pro Tem Liz Brown, Councilmember Mitch Brown, and Councilmember Favor. Thank you all for joining me this evening. As we get started, we're joined this evening by the Director of the Department of Economic Development, Michael Stevens, who will be providing the presentation this evening. We're also pleased to have in attendance Adam Flatto, the CEO of the Georgetown Companies, speaking in relation to the Easton-related TIF ordinances, and Franz Geiger, the Managing Partner of NP Limited Partnership and Polaris Centers of Commerce, speaking in relation to the Polaris TIF ordinances. This past Monday, November 16th, 9 TIF ordinances were on the council agenda for first reading, and they include 2601-2020, the Easton TIF Amendment, 2621-2020, Easton TIF Reimbursement Agreement, 2600-2020, Polaris TIF Amendment, 2622-2020, Polaris Amendment and Restated Agreement, 2619-2020, PNC Gilbert TIF Creation Downtown, 2620-2020, Madison High Street TIF Creation also downtown, 2545-2020, the Stadium 41 TIF Agreement in Confluence Village, 2571-2020, the Stadium 41 TIF and Cooperative Agreement also in Confluence Village, and 2563-2020 Rickenbacker 317 TIF Expansion Amendment. This evening, Director Stevens will provide us with an overview of TIFs, what they are, and why they are used. Then we will proceed into discussing each of the 9 ordinances previously mentioned. Before I get started, I want to remind everyone that this hearing is currently live on YouTube and Facebook, and is also live and being recorded for rebroadcast on CTV, Columbus's Government Television Channel 3. The rebroadcast schedule is available at www.columbus.gov. Before I get started, I just wanted to see if any of my colleagues had any comments that they would like to make this evening before I turn it over to Director Stevens. I see nods to the negative. All right. Well, without further ado, I'd like to turn over the floor to Director Mike Stevens to begin the presentation this evening. Director Stevens, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair Remy, members of council. Thank you for holding this hearing and giving me the opportunity to give a little background on tax increment financing and why we use it. Tax increment financing, or TIFs, is a tool to finance public infrastructure improvements that support commercial development and, in certain circumstances, residential rehabilitation. The Department of Development has strategically established TIFs throughout the city of Columbus to assist in the financing and construction of public infrastructure for both community and economic development purposes. TIFs are authorized and created through TIF legislation adopted by local government. A TIF works by allowing that increase in assessed value of an improvement to real property to be exempt from real property taxation. The property owners instead make payment in lieu of taxes, or pilots, in an amount equal to only the increase in property taxes generated by the improvement. The pilots are directed to local government and deposit into a TIF fund to be used to pay for the construction of public infrastructure defined within the TIF legislation. It is important to note that the property taxes on the real property values existing before the enactment of the TIF, the base value, continue to be collected and distributed to the taxing entities that levied them. Disbursements from the TIF funds reimburse the entity that made the infrastructure improvements over time as revenues become available. If the TIF continues to generate revenue beyond the project's infrastructure costs, the revenues remain with the city and can be used to add additional TIF-eligible infrastructure projects needed to spur private development or to maintain the sufficiency of the public infrastructure within the TIF district. TIFs in the City of Columbus have historically been authorized by 2 statutes in the Ohio Revised Code. 5709.40, which we refer to as .40 TIFs, and 09.41, which we all refer to as 0.14 TIFs. 0.40 TIFs must generally be used to pay for public infrastructure improvements such as public roads and highways, water and sewer lines, sidewalks, public parks, and parking structures. 0.1 TIFs, also known as urban redevelopment TIFs, are able to be used to pay for public infrastructure improvements eligible under the 0.40 TIFs, as well as private improvements. In order to create a 0.41 TIF, the city or municipality must be or have been in the chain of title of the property prior to the adoption of the TIF legislation. Within the Columbus City Schools District, the City of Columbus creates non-school TIFs. This means the school district will continue to receive the amount of property taxes that would have been payable to the school district if there were no TIF exemption enacted by the local government. TIFs are a benefit to the community because they pay for the cost of public infrastructure improvements needed to spur private development or maintain the sufficiency of the public infrastructure in the area of private development. The property owners are sharing in the cost of infrastructure improvements benefiting their TIF district. Furthermore, these investments relieve pressure on the city's capital budget and general fund budget and stimulates development or redevelopment that would not occur without the TIF structure being in place. The General Authority for Municipal TIFs was established by HB 1328 in 1976. There are over 1,200 active TIFs statewide. There are currently 81 TIFs within the City of Columbus. That's a quick overview of TIFs and why we're using them. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and then if there are none, I'll move into the overview of some of the TIF ordinances before us.
I see President Pro Tem has a question.
Thank you, and thank you, Director Stevens. Can you explain a little bit more? You made the statement that that TIFs relieve pressure on our capital budgets. Can you explain that a little bit more, exactly how they do that? And yeah, we'll leave it there.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Brown, Chair Remy, members of council. The relief we're talking about is sometimes when we're dealing with complex economic development deals, there are investments that the city can make to help bring those jobs and investment to our community. With the TIF being in place, we're able to use those TIF dollars to make those infrastructure investments and not have to budget those through our capital improvement plan and take away from other neighborhood needs that our capital budget supports.
And why is it that if these are such smart economic development investments, why is it that we wouldn't just prioritize them in our capital budget? And, it's 6 in one, half dozen in the other.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Brown. That's a great question. There are a lot of community investments we make, whether it's within our recreation and parks programming, whether it's just our roadway repavement programs that we do, the infrastructure we invest in through, say, our refuse department when we purchase more vehicles. So as you're aware, and all the members of council are aware, we have competing priorities for these capital budget dollars. So having these TIF dollars available to reduce or relieve some of the stress on those competing priorities helps us make those investments in those economic development projects while continuing to serve our residents and with some basic city services.
Councilmember Favor.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. Director Stevens, does the Ohio Revised Code provide a time frame how long these TIFs last, and what happens once one expires?
Thank you, Chair Favor, members of council. It does. TIFs are allowed to be created for a 30-year period. But tonight we're going to be dealing with two potential extensions where the Ohio Revised Code was recently, language was created or the legislator passed a bill that gave the opportunity to extend TIFs. And the reason that happened is when the TIF legislation was first conceived and put into place, I don't think people understood or conceived the idea that we'd have job centers like Easton and Polaris that 30 years, 25 to 30 years after the TIF would be in place, we're still growing and still have the opportunity for additional investment and job creation. So while the initial legislation called for 30 years, the state legislature made a change where if a TIF district generated $1.5 million in TIF revenue, they had in a year, they had the 12 months of the next year. So in this case, Easton generated more than 1.5 million TIF revenue in 2019. So they had through the end of 2020 to extend that TIF another 30 years.
And just for residents who are watching here tonight, what happens when a regular TIF that's not going to be extended expires?
Then those, instead of making payment in lieu of taxes, those payments go to the taxing authorities, or the levy agencies that have put taxing millage on the tax duplicate, I think is the correct term.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dorans.
Thank you, Chair Remy. Director Stevens, I think this is a pretty obvious question, but I'm asking it to make sure that we underline this a couple of different ways. I think that there's oftentimes confusion when you talk about TIFs in the context of other types of incentives that the city provides to other types of projects. So can you speak to, not to sort of say the answer before you get there, but that talk a little bit more about how this differs in the sense that taxes are still being paid and just the structure for the nature of like what those taxes are being used for rather than returning to, say, the general fund to be used in another manner. So I just want to make sure we underline the difference between, say, other types of incentives in which maybe taxes aren't flowing, an entity may not be paying taxes based upon an agreement, whereas a TIF is a very different economic development tool. Could you just speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Dorans. That's a really good point. A TIF is a tool that we're using finance to reinvest back into our infrastructure. So we're not, as opposed to an enterprise zone or a community reinvestment area where those property taxes are abated and not required to be paid, the beneficiary of the TIF still makes those payment in lieu of taxes, those pilots, that is equivalent to the tax amount so that investment can be made back into that infrastructure. And that's a really critical point, that it's not the developer or the entity who we're partnering with on the TIF is not getting in, their tax burden is not being reduced. It is being redirected to those infrastructure improvements that are critical for the development and the investment that really results in jobs and improved infrastructure around the development.
Thank you, Director. And if I could follow up on that. So what happens if council approves a TIF agreement, the developer or party never develops anything on that property? So, we agree to the TIF agreement, whatever happens within for that developer, no new project comes out of the ground. What happens in that instance?
In that instance, no TIF revenue is put into, I'm sorry, Councilmember Durham, let me go back and state that a different way. These are performance incentives. So if the developer does not make the investment, the incremental increase that would be generated through that investment does not occur. So their revenue doesn't go into the TIF fund, but they're also not property taxes that are lost to the community because the investment has not happened. It is truly a performance-based tool that requires the developer to make that investment to benefit from those TIF funds and reimbursing on the infrastructure costs.
Thank you. So to be fair, would it be accurate to say, one, any party under a TIF agreement is paying their full share of their tax burden, and two, if they do not, do the development that sort of is the basis of creating the TIF, then there would be no benefit to putting that money aside. In essence, there would be no money that would flow in any way. Correct?
Very well said. That is 100% correct.
Thank you, Director.
Council member, Dorrance, thank you. Chair, Director Stevens, a little bit further down that vein, what happens with the schools with TIFs? And then also, I think it's important to point out that the developer makes the upfront investment in the improvements, and these are purely to reimburse. So I just talk to those 2 points if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Chair Remy. When we set up these TIFs, we exempt the schools from the TIFs, so we call them non-school TIFs. So when the pilot payments come in, the schools are made whole from the amount of property tax they would have received directly if the TIF wasn't in place. It's in form of a pilot. So we make the payments to the school. So what's great about this is actually by using this tool, we're getting new investment in our community that results in additional revenue for the school districts. I forget your second question. I apologize. I just blanked on that. Do you mind repeating the second half of that question?
Yeah, I was just talking about how they make the investment up front and then they're reimbursed. So it's out of their pocket initially.
Yeah, a lot of the TIFs we've been doing recently are reimbursement. So we do TIF reimbursement agreements where the developer will take the risk and make the investment, and then we'll get reimbursed for those infrastructure costs. I do want to note, in the past we have done projects where the city has used some of its funds to make those infrastructure improvements and have been reimbursed from the TIF. But the ones we're talking about this evening are all projects where the investment will be made up front and the costs will be incurred by the developer and then reimbursed through the TIF.
Thank you. Any of my other colleagues have any additional questions? All right, keep on moving, Director Stevens.
Great, thank you. The ordinances that are before council for second reading on Monday, you summarized very well, Chair Remy. The first two, 2601-2020 and 2621-2020, are with regards to the Easton project. As we know, for almost 30 years, Easton has been a successful development within our community, a critical job center, and actually was the first TIF agreement that we put in place that has not only, I would say, has overperformed. So what we're asking council to consider on Monday evening is to extend that TIF another 30 years. So 2601-2020 is the legislation to make that TIF extension. And 2621-2020 is the legislation that summarizes the business terms of that extension. And it's a little different than what we've done with other TIF agreements. We've worked with the developer to identify some public policy priorities that we wanted to have addressed with this extension. First, once the TIF gets extended, the city will share in 12.5% of that TIF revenue that can be used to be invested in our public policy priorities around community development, whether it's infrastructure improvements around affordable housing and other infrastructure improvements in communities and neighborhoods throughout the city, because it is a remote TIF. The second is the developer has agreed from 2021 through 2027 to make a contribution to the city of $750,000 a year that will be used for public policy priorities, specifically around affordable housing and rental assistance are some of the examples. It's an annual payment, and City Council will ultimately pass legislation that appropriates those dollars and what specific priority for each year. The third component of that deal that's captured in 2621 is the developer has agreed to donate land at Easton Town Center to one of our local affordable housing developers, Homeport, to build a affordable housing tax credit project of 200 units of I'm blanking on, I apologize. It's going to be 200 units of long-term, affordable, supportive housing. That was the word. I apologize. As part of this deal, which we're excited to have really help drive mixed-use development that's going to occur and mixed income development that's going to occur at Easton Town Center. A big driver of why we're doing this is, and we have Adam Flato here who's going to talk shortly when I stop talking, but there's a significant amount of job creation that's going to occur through the development that they're projecting. We're projecting over 15,000 new jobs at Easton as a result of that. We're projecting over $150 million of net new income tax revenue over the 30 years for the city. Over the 30 years, they've identified almost 3 million square feet of new office space, as well as 2,000 new units of housing. And so we know as we are preparing ourselves to come out of this pandemic and have an economic recovery that is resilient but also inclusive, having jobs and housing is going to be really important. So that is some of the critical factors beyond why we're moving forward the Easton TIF extension as well as the Polaris. And I'll get more detail when we get to that agenda item. But I know Adam's here, and Chair Remy, I will stop and see if there's any questions, or if Adam wants to say a few words as well.
Yeah, and I also want to recognize Council President Harden, who's joined us as well. Yeah, to hear a little bit more. I'm sorry I mispronounced that a little bit earlier, but certainly want to hear, kind of the successes of Easton so far, specifically about, the type of taxes generated and that have helped to support the schools over the existence of your creation, and then what your projections are. So, Mr. Flato, go ahead. Got it. Mute. I think you're on mute.
One more. Is that better?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So thank you, and President Harden and members of City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening on behalf of Easton and the proposed tax increment financing extension. As mentioned, I'm Adam Flato, the Georgetown Company. We are co-owners and co-developers of Easton. And in fact, we've been part of Easton from its very start. The beginning and the start is where I'd like to start tonight, because I think it best illustrates the significant impact that Easton has had on Columbus and the community. Prior to Easton's development, the 1,200 acres on which Easton sits within the city of Columbus generated less than $5 million in total tax revenues. Fast forward to today, Easton has generated over $400 million in tax revenues for the city of Columbus alone since its inception. Easton serves as one of Columbus's largest economic engines. In 2019, Easton generated nearly $200 million in 1 year alone for the state, county, city, and school district. As was mentioned before, the TIF at Easton is a non-school TIF, so that this Columbus City Schools benefit directly from all of the development. To date, total tax revenues generated for the Columbus City School District has been almost $220 million. The tax revenue and jobs created over these years, both for construction and for businesses that call Easton home, was made possible, and in fact, the critical linchpin of making that possible was the TIF that enabled infrastructure development that fueled the growth of Easton, not just in restaurants, retail, and entertainment businesses, but in the offices and operation centers that represent thousands of jobs. Before Easton, there were less than 1,000 jobs located within the 1,200 acres. Today, there are in excess of 25,000 people working at Easton. With approximately 200 acres left to develop at Easton, an extension of the TIF will expedite job growth sooner and at a much faster rate. This will include not only office jobs, but also construction jobs. As the growth occurs, we intend to, and part of our agreement related to this TIF extension, is to support the city's goal of 30% of construction contracts to go to qualified minority and women-owned businesses. The TIF extension will enable approximately $1 billion in new incremental tax revenues over the next 30 years and we project will add over 15,000 new jobs to the Easton area. The TIF funds, as we've heard before, are going to be utilized to complete significant public infrastructure that's necessary to support this additional office, residential, hotel, and retail development at Easton. Finally, again, as was mentioned, we're just incredibly pleased to be collaborating with Homeport to bring 200 units of affordable housing to the development. We're excited about offering this option as we know there's significant demand for quality affordable housing in the community at large and among the employees at Easton businesses. This was a very fiercely negotiated transaction and deal that will significantly benefit the City of Columbus now and into the future, and we are just extremely pleased to continue our incredible partnership with the City of Columbus for years to come. I thank you.
On the affordable housing piece, a lot of we're trying to get below 80% AMI, 80 to 100% AMI. So, what are we talking about with these 200 units? What does that support allow?
So our agreement with the city is that we're going to partner with Homeport to create a 200-unit project which will conform to the guidelines to provide for low-income housing tax credits, which means that the affordability will be far, far greater than the 80% level. We're going to have units going down probably into the 40 and 50% level. Again, in accordance with the guidelines of the low-income housing tax credit program and in partnership with Homeport. So it's a far deeper level of affordability than was originally considered.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but by us approving this legislation, what does that mean to spur the development? Say that we didn't do this and your TIF expired in 2026. Where would you be development-wise if you didn't get this extension today?
Yeah, clearly it's not that we would go out of business, but the rate and our ability to grow would be significantly hampered. In order to create development for years in the future, we need to invest upfront in infrastructure. So over the next few years, we plan on building roads, sewers, other publicly dedicated infrastructure in order to anticipate that growth so we can be competitive and capture for the City of Columbus businesses that might otherwise locate in areas outside the city. So it's that tool, the TIF tool, that gives us certainty to be able to speak to potential companies that are thinking about locating in Columbus and at Easton to say that we can deliver the infrastructure that they need without having to go back to the city on every time, one at a time, going to the city's capital fund to fund those things. So that TIF fund has been the critical component that has allowed us the growth that's taken place to date. And it's that tool that will allow us to continue on that path of growth that we've had.
Because of COVID, you've almost quietly opened up a new section to Easton. Not what you wanted probably, but it's a different type of Easton. It's not the same as the rest. And so maybe talk a little bit about that, and then what you envision for the future with these TIF dollars, and also where they are in relation for the public to understand where this expansion might take place.
So you're right, council member. The timing of our opening was not ideal. We've been, thankfully, been working through it well, though, and our tenants and our merchants have been finding success, which is great. You're right too to observe that the expansion that we did has a different nature than the development of the past, and it really reflects the demand that we're getting from companies and from employers. The level of density that we're creating at Easton now is going to be far greater than we had in the past. That sense of mixed uses in a tight, dense neighborhood where people can go downstairs, not have to get in their car, but can walk to the restaurants and other amenities and be in that tight location is what employers are demanding. Part of our plan as well is to create additional residences. So that likewise, people that are working at Easton have the opportunity to live within walking distance, and that's why the affordable housing product is, so exciting for us, is to provide that mixed income opportunity, all within walking distance of all these employment centers. so we can have the chance to get some cars off the roads and help with traffic in the region. So it is really reflective that this expansion is really reflective of where companies are heading now, to have this dense urban feeling of mixed use in a tight way, and those TIF funds allow us to create that infrastructure to do that.
And just and also just kind of tell people where this expansion is going to take place. I mean, like over by Hilton, that type of thing.
Yeah. So we've been very careful over the years, rather than chopping up parcels of land and selling off an acre here or 2 acres there. We've been very careful to keep large blocks of land untouched, with the notion that with careful planning and really thoughtful design, we can create things which are really market leaders and create one product which our consumers have really responded to. So as you pointed out, the land between the town center and Stelzer Road has large chunks of that land are still left undeveloped and ready for future development, which we anticipate in this high density fashion. Same too along the south side of the town center, and as well on the east side of Stelzer along 270. So we have large chunks of land which this TIF and the infrastructure funds are going to be benefiting.
Do my colleagues have questions this evening for Mr. Flato? Yeah, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Chair Remy. Thank you, Chair Remy. Just one quick question, and most folks think of Easton as a retail commercial center, and primarily it is. But I think one of the things that most folks don't know or don't appreciate about a place like Easton is the amount of office jobs and other type of jobs that exist within Easton, which obviously is very important for the city of Columbus as it relates to our income tax. So I want to know if you could speak to sort of that aspect of Easton as a job center, separate from maybe the retail portion of the development that maybe most residents may be more familiar with.
Yeah, Councilman, you're absolutely correct. The 25,000 employees at Easton, only a minority of those employees are actually retail employees. The vast majority of those are office workers, and they are high income paying office workers. The result of that is that even with the TIF that we have currently in place, the city of Columbus just in 2019 alone received over $40 million in revenues from Easton. That's reflective of the kinds of income that is being paid by employees and the taxes generated from those. So what we found is that with the tools that we've been able to utilize, the TIF being the most important one, combined with the amenities we've created, Easton has become an incredibly attractive location for companies that are considering how to locate in a place that they can attract and retain employees. The large JP Morgan Chase facility is a good example, where they chose to build a new facility at Easton because of the belief that that would be a place where they could really grow and attract employees. Same for Huntington, same for so many other companies. And in fact, over the years, that's proven to be very much the case as they've expanded and continued to grow. So very correct point. Vast majority of jobs added Easton are office jobs.
Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Councilman Remy. Mr. Flato, I had some technical difficulties, but in the earlier part, you made mention about 30% minority involvement, or can you elaborate on that for me, please?
Yeah, with the city, we've agreed to support the goal of getting 30% minority and women-owned businesses as part of our construction contracts related to all the TIF construction that we're going to be doing out at Easton.
In the previous activity, did you have a percentage before?
We regularly have reached out to, but never had any stated goal that we were targeting to get a minimum amount. So we've had minority and women-owned activity consistently through the years. but this will elevate the target of how we're going to be outreaching to the minority community for contracts.
And could you give us a number approximately, like women-owned businesses currently?
Councilman, I don't have that offhand. I can certainly try to give an estimate, and we can circle back with you and Director Stevens to give you the number.
I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure.
That's it for me, Councilmember.
Thanks, Councilmember Brown. I'm going to throw this over to the director again. I'd like you to reiterate, and this kind of goes for both deals, but again, what the differences on with Easton and Polaris, what they have existing, what this new extension is going to bring to the city, because there's stark differences, and I think it needs to be highlighted again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Remy. It's important as we go to extend this TIF, there's going to be a sharing of the TIF revenue at 12.5% for both deals that is going to be utilized to invest in infrastructure projects throughout the city. Adam mentioned that Easton's is committed to the goal of 30% minority participation. Polaris is as well. That is something that with this extension we're asking for. We saw that last year with the development agreement around Confluence Village and the crew. It's important to note that the other major public policy priority was affordable housing. A little bit different between Easton and Polaris, but so at Easton, they are donating the land to work with Homeport to provide that permanent supportive low-income housing project, 200 units that are going to be income averaged at 60% AMI. So that means you're going to have some below 60 and some above, but over a long-term permanent time frame, which is significant as we look, because as Easton adds the 2,000 residential units and goes and really starts becoming a neighborhood, it's going to be truly a mixed income neighborhood. Polaris is also committed to providing affordable housing units, and as part of their extension, they build housing units. So they are going to hold on the land and build that. They're committed to 20% of the units that they're going to build out there are going to be affordable. They're committed to a percentage of that, 5% of that 20%, and now we're getting into different numbers, at 60% AMI, 5% at 80% AMI, and then 10% at 100% AMI. So we've seen some real significant commitments from developers at both areas that goes back into the city's priorities, both near term and long term. And then the last thing I don't think we want to lose sight of is the commitment that both Easton and Polaris are making starting in 21. Easton's making that $750,000 commitment to the city to be invested in our community development priorities. Polaris is making a $500,000 commitment of TIF existing TIF revenue that will go into, that can be used throughout the community for infrastructure projects and our community development pieces. So I think that's what you're asking for. Those are some of the highlights that are different, and we worked hard because this is unique, this extension of these TIFs. We get a lot of benefit out on the job creation side, but we also get benefits that are going to impact and help serve our community now, as well as over the next 30 years as these investments happen.
Yeah, and I think, it's important to point out that we recognize as council there was this gap. The extension really doesn't take place and the dollars don't start going into this till 27, 28. And so those payments were negotiated, and we appreciate the investment that, both Easton's making and Polaris is making for council initiatives that are important to council. That will reflect the values and the strategies that we're working on to make Columbus a better place to live. So with that, I think we can move on now to Franz. Does that sound good to you, Director?
Yeah, I think I gave a pretty good overview of what their deal is, and I think having him talk a little bit about what
we can take questions.
They can be great.
Yeah. Franz, welcome, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Councilman Remy. and all the members of council. We too, like Easton, are an employment center. We worked really hard with Director Stevens and Mark Lundeen and briefing the council members on this project. It's an exciting project. As you know, currently the retail world, the office world, the development world is hurting. We don't have the, right now with COVID, businesses are hurting. And they're going to need help in the future, and infrastructure is one of those things that will be helpful. Polaris was annexed into the city of Columbus back in 1991. And some of the questions that were interesting about, well, what does a TIF do? Well, when Columbus annexed Polaris, Polaris was farmland. And that farmland really did not generate any real estate tax revenue at all. And so what a TIF does is it allows development to pay its own way. And what that means is as development occurs, the infrastructure can be built to support that development. And it's a symbiotic type of relationship there, but it's not, it's a way that the development, the incremental increase in those values can help fund necessary infrastructure. And as a result of the TIF that the City of Columbus passed in 1996, it has enabled significant infrastructure to be built in the Polaris area, which has led to not only, as Adam was saying, hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue, which it has, but it's allowed there to be this great infrastructure off of I-71 that has allowed employees to be based here. And specifically, we have JP Morgan Chase with 11,000 employees and 2 million square feet. It's a huge structure. We have McGraw-Hill, Mettler Toledo, VM Software, just to name a few. But the number of employees up here, it's critical to have the infrastructure. And the infrastructure, it's not only infrastructure that for the future, but it's just to sustain the development, because we do have additional acreage available for development. And like Director Stevens said, it's unusual for development to be kind of on another life cycle. And both Easton and Polaris have been fortunate in that there's been sustainability built into developments. A lot of times people say, well, these developments can only last like 30 years. But actually, I feel like we're just starting in a lot of facets of our development, because we do have additional acreage left, and infrastructure can be built to further develop that and create even more employment centers, better type of developments. People like the mixed use developments. They like to be where they can work, play, and recreate, all in the same area. And we're going to have the opportunity to do that if the TIF ends up being extended. And so we feel like this is a win for the city. We feel it's not only good politics, it's good policy, more importantly. And it's a way to allow infrastructure to be funded without tapping into your capital improvement budget like we've talked about. And we just appreciate the opportunity to work with council. We've had a great relationship with the City of Columbus, and we look forward to the relationship in the future and to continue to build this area up and see the City of Columbus continue to grow.
Thanks, Franz. Could you explain a little bit, kind of like I asked Mr. Flato, what the expansion plans are? I know you have some ideas for roads and, new roads and things along those lines. I mean, Polaris is a little bit different in the way that it's developed. So could you explain what the future holds?
Right. So when you look at Easton's more of what we would call a dense mixed use environment. And Polaris is what I call a horizontal kind of mixed use, where we don't have the vertical mixed use type of development, but we're getting there. We're starting. We have the Point project is one of those where we have housing and office and retail and restaurants all within a very tight corridor. The next phase of our development is to do similar type projects. We want to do a mixed-use development just east of Top Golf. And in that particular area is where we have made that commitment to workforce housing, affordable housing, and also using minority and contractors and also women-owned businesses to further those construction projects. But that particular area, we really feel that it lends itself perfectly to dense mixed-use environment. And with the entertainment component, we feel like we can also have housing there, and it can be walkable and more dense and an attractive place to live. But also, we need workers up in Polaris. We, but pre-COVID, we had our unemployment was less than 3.5%, and so we could not find employees for the service industry. And we want to have the workforce housing here so people can actually work and walk out their door and do things and live in the community. And so that's a key component for us. The other infrastructure that I think is going to be a game changer and really make it better for not only the city of Columbus residents, but the Delaware County residents is the extension of Lyra Drive, which will go north to Powell Road. And that opens up about 30 acres of land along I-71. And the reason why that's significant is we are the first part of Columbus that you see when you're coming south on 71. You see the big board up for the traffic infrastructure, the digital board. But that's where Columbus starts. And it is an opportunity, I think, to increase the employment center that we have with potential highway-based type office buildings, because a lot of the office users like to have that type of frontage and visibility. So those are just a few of the things that I see happening with our future plans and how the infrastructure will tie into that.
Thank you very much. Either of my council colleagues that are left still have any questions? Thank you, Franz. We appreciate that. Director Stevens, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chair Remy. I don't have any additional information with regards to the Polaris TIF extension. I appreciate Franz and Adam being here to give a little more detail on both of those projects. Happy to answer any questions on that. If not, I'm happy to go on and talk about some of the other TIFs that we're asking council to pass on Monday night or consider during second reading.
Sure thing. Please move forward.
Great. Thank you. Ordinances 2619, 2020, and 2620-2020 is what we're doing there. Those are downtown related TIFs. We're taking parcels out of the existing downtown TIF and creating two new TIFs. One is at the at East Broad Street at the old PNC, or not the old, at the PNC building and the Gilbert building. That is a .40 TIF, and it is removing the parcels at 155 and 195 East Broad Street from the downtown TIF and putting the new TIF to fund public improvements associated with the redevelopment of these parcels, including plazas and above ground walkways in the surrounding areas. What they're doing at the PNC building is they're reworking some of that space and making improvements to the Class A office space, which we need. It's critical that we have some upgraded Class A office space in our downtown. The Gilbert building is being repurposed into housing, and Edwards, who is developing the project, has committed to an affordable component of that as well in that project. And then the walkways connecting these buildings, the public walkways around, are going to be improved and using these .40 TIFs to do that. The other ordinance improves the buildings at High and Gay Street, the Madison and White Haynes buildings. So we are going to be taking out, I'm trying to get the address here. I'm sorry, I don't have the address. But similar to what we're doing with the PNC Tower and the Gilbert building, we're taking the Madison building and the White Haynes building out of the existing TIF, creating a new TIF. And while we know that those are going to be housing projects. We haven't identified the public improvements around those buildings that will use that use those TIF dollars to do the infrastructure improvements, but we wanted to proactively get these TIFs put in place, so when those improvements are made, we can make the infrastructure improvements around it. If you're familiar with that site on the northeast corner of Gay and High, these buildings are in bad shape. So we're excited to see that the Edwards Company is working on redeveloping them and making the improvements needed at critical crossroads of our downtown. I'd be happy to answer a question about either one of those ordinances that are creating these two new TIF districts in the downtown.
Do my colleagues have any questions this evening? I don't. All right. Keep on moving.
Great, thank you. The next ordinance, 2563-2020, is we're expanding the Rickenbacker TIF down, obviously in the Rickenbacker area. This really captures some greenfield areas that we anticipate further expansion and investment down in Rickenbacker. We're proactively doing this. We don't have any specific projects that are going to result from this, but we want to put this in place, and when those projects happen, we're generating the TIF revenue to make, one, to be able to reimburse any developer who has infrastructure projects that they want to do, and we can make those investments. So this is really trying to get ahead of it and be proactive on this tool to continue to invest in one of our job centers. I'd be happy to answer any questions with regards to this TIF.
Looks like you've answered them all.
Great, thank you. And then the final two pieces of legislation for council consideration on Monday is 2545 and 2571. This is a continuation of what City Council approved last year around this time, when we modified a number of TIFs in the arena districts in Confluence Village as part of the development agreement associated with saving the crew. So this is not a new deal. There's not new dollars going towards this. It's just it's finishing up these TIF modifications that we started last year. We didn't do this one last year because we know the mixed-use development that's going to occur at Confluence Village wasn't going to start until 2021. So we didn't put it in place because we didn't want to lose a year of the waste a year to capture incremental increase in TIF revenue. So we're pulling these parcels out of the existing Yeager TIF, creating a new TIF, and then we have the companion legislation is the agreement on how we utilize those TIF dollars. I'd be happy to answer any questions with that regards to that as well.
You're hitting 1,000 tonight.
Let's hope that carries over to Monday.
That's right. Any other information you'd like to convey this evening?
No, I appreciate council taking the time and let us have the opportunity to share this information with you and really share with our residents in the community, why we use these tax increment financing tools and how important they are for the really the long-term growth of both short-term and long-term growth of this city. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Stevens. And of course, we did this hearing last year as well. It's kind of a standing tradition, I think, to make sure that the public understands exactly what TIF are and how they're utilized within development and economic development, and to really help the city of Columbus grow. I think you heard many times it mentioned about income tax revenue. I mean, that's over 75% of our budget is derived from income tax. And so we need to make sure that, especially in COVID times, that there are new opportunities for new employers to grow that revenue. Otherwise, things like our basic services, we have to look at things like cutting them. So economic development is a critical part of what any city does in order to maintain and grow in the future. And we're fortunate to have a robust economy here in Columbus. And so appreciate the opportunity. We have no speakers this evening. So before I bring this hearing to a close, I just want to thank our viewers for tuning in and the community for their continued engagement and feedback. I want to thank Angela Burks, Mark Carter, and our CTV team for assisting with our technology needs and connecting us with the community. I also want to, again, thank Director Stevens, Hannah Reed, Quentin Harris, and the Economic Development team for helping us prepare for this hearing. I want to acknowledge and show my appreciation to my council colleagues for joining us in this discussion this evening. Thank you to President Pro Tem Brown, Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Faber, Councilmember Dorans, and President Hardin for joining us this evening. And lastly, I'd like to thank Andrew Dyer with the Office of Legislative Research, and of course, my team, Jeffrey Carter and Lucy Frank, for their efforts in preparing us for this hearing this evening. If there's no other comments from my colleagues, I will close out this hearing and wish everyone a very great evening. Thank you.